So, beyond senior, this is my topic today. What happens if you move into technical leadership and take on what the industry often calls now staff plus role? So I'm going to be sharing some of my personal journey growing as a principal engineer over the past 3 years and lessons I've learned along the way. So if you're considering a staff plus role, my hope is that this talk will give you an insight into what it might look like compared to a senior role. And if you're already in a staff plus role, I hope that you can take something from the strategies I use, which help me do the job now more effectively. So first, who am I? My name is Dawn. This is me hanging out in the mountains in Vancouver, where I live in Canada, which is my happy place. And yeah, this is not a Canadian accent though. I am from New Zealand originally. Just to clarify, New Zealand, not the same as Australia. Very important distinction. We're a proud, independent little island and in fact, very unique and different. As you can tell from our flag, where we have very clearly one less star. Thank you very much. So I'm a principal engineer at a company called Thinkific. This is us at our last company retreat. We're an online platform that's allowed over 50,000 creator educators build and sell online courses, communities, and digital products. So technical career path. It often starts a bit like a ladder. So all sorts of different titles at different companies for these, but generally the path is pretty linear at first. Once you reach senior, you've grown your technical skills, maybe you're leading projects, mentoring peers, setting best practices. But what's the next step of this ladder? So traditionally, there's this management track. That's where you can start leading people and having direct reports, common across many industries. Or a growing option in tech now, especially as organizations grow larger, is this more technical leadership focused route, which is commonly referred to now as staff plus roles. And this is where you'll find titles like staff engineer, principal engineer, or distinguished engineer. And these two sides aren't a binary choice, by the way. I've heard it can even be useful to think of it more as a pendulum, because pivoting between sides can actually help you build skills that are useful to the other. But so far, my path has been on the right, and so I will be focusing on my experience going on that direction today. So I was hired at Thinkific as a senior full stack engineer. Looking back now, I guess I was operating a bit closer to what Thinkific now calls a staff engineer. But the level didn't exist at Thinkific yet, as we were a bit of a smaller company at that stage. But pretty quickly, it became clear I was interested in aspects beyond my senior title. So I was reaching beyond my team to push initiatives that benefited the wider company. And I'd expressed a desire to grow more in the architecture direction as well. So when a principal engineer role opened up, I was encouraged to apply. And I got the role, but there was a lot of naivety in my decision to take it. On paper, a fancy title with more seniority, it sounds like the natural progression of the career ladder if you don't want to manage people, especially. But the role is quite a significant shift in responsibilities. Because what even is a principal engineer? It's just a title, and titles can mean very different things at different companies. Role descriptions are also often getting vaguer. You get terms like influence and strategy and facilitate change and align business priorities and all these other great qualities, which are all excellent sounding words, but what do they actually mean as a day-to-day job? And coming into the role, I really had a limited understanding of the expectations, and I didn't comprehend how much I'd have to learn to actually do the job effectively without burning out. So after 3 years of doing the role, I've summarized my learnings for you into 4 core lessons. Number 1, understand the role. Number 2, prioritize yourself. Number 3, uplift others. And number 4, strategize. The way I see it, each of these elements build on each other. So you need to understand the role to know what to prioritize in your own self-growth. You need to have that self-stability to think about uplifting others. And you need to be supporting others in order to effectively strategize and reach this enlightenment stage or something like it. So let's unpack each of those. Number 1, understand the role. So the role is very different, likely going to be very different to your role as a senior. And yes, one key difference for me is I spend less time programming. I'm still active in the code base, but delivery is no longer my core focus. Instead, code for me tends to be more investigative or exploratory proof of concepts. The Thinkific principal engineer acts something between a tech lead and an architect, but sitting across multiple teams. So I define the technical vision for a particular business line, and then I lead 3 teams to deliver feature projects within it, delegating the execution to the teams themselves, but focusing mostly on the higher level strategy. And those terms, tech lead and architect, are taken from Will Larson's book on staff engineering, a highly recommended read. He defines 4 different types of software engineer archetypes. And if I was to give a disclaimer about this talk, it's that my principal engineer definition is just one flavor of the way the role can manifest differently. So I'm working with many teams in a business line and centered around Thinkific's learning experience. So this is things like creator onboarding, product building, and student course taking. And I work closest with each team's pod, which is made up of an engineering manager, a product manager, and a designer. And then as a pod, we're ideating and scoping projects for the following quarter, while also working to keep the team unblocked on the current quarter. So I am personally supporting the engineers with execution, so through code reviews or mentorship or technical guidance. And then I also play a role in coordination across other business lines, especially with more complex technical projects that might span multiple domains. One example of one such project, in 2022, I led this initiative to deliver a new communities product. And this involved refactoring across our entire Rails monolith to support multiple products outside of courses. And so this touched a number of domains, including my own, but also things like payments, checkout, and integrations. As a result, I worked not only with my 3 teams, but with at least 5 other teams to coordinate the technical goals and objectives across the larger project. And this collaboration extends beyond engineering teams too, to be more cross-functional across many areas of business. So I'm frequently interacting with design leadership, product leadership, data analysts, UX researchers, directors, executives. The role is just far more holistic. And the more connections I make, the more knowledge I build for the way the entire organization functions. And it means the more support I have for moving larger multi-team initiatives like that. And the key difference of the principal engineer role is like having a longer term view. So as a senior, I was thinking weeks, maybe months in advance to help deliver sprint work. But as a principal, I'm thinking quarter, a year, even multiple years out. So instead of focusing on building a feature, I'm thinking further out towards visions of the future state of our product in crafting technical strategy and aligning projects to get us there. The working at this level really means thinking about the bigger picture and how to make an impact. With the context of multiple teams and domains, but no direct reports, I have this ability to really go deeper on the technical side than I ever could in a more managerial role. So I'm still very close to the code and crafting architecture and strategy to really keep our system sustainable. And with this high-level perspective, it's easier to see the more impactful pieces to move and then influence those changes across my team and the wider company. I figured the easiest insight to what the role looks like, though, is to show you an average week from my calendar. This was last week in April. So I use PodSyncs as my major touch point with the teams without me being involved in every sprint level ceremony. I set office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays to allow folks to book time with me without fragmenting my calendar completely. And then I have regular one-on-ones with folks I'm mentoring and more senior members of the team so that they can then take the more leadership role with the rest of the team. I also stay close to other principals and architects to discuss wider technical strategy. I have cross-functional calls for larger projects, syncs with my business line. And this week I had some technical exploration calls with some third-party vendors around integrations. But there are less meetings in there than it looks like because I block out the end of the day for afternoon catch-up and then keep focus chunks to work on my top priorities without interruption. And a lot of the other meetings in between are actually just events I make for myself at the start of the day to really keep myself accountable to commitments and also track better what's taking up my time. But the role is quite dynamic. So some weeks might look like that. Other weeks, I might clear my schedule to focus on a proof of concept or jump into an incident to help or join a 3-day product workshop to focus on the longer feature roadmap. So I have to be flexible enough to adapt to what the week might throw at me, but also know when to push back so that I can make space for my long-term strategic goals. At this level, there's no one telling me what to work on. I'm responsible for my priorities. So choose your own adventure, so to speak. And I really love this aspect, but it's definitely a switch from senior when you're most likely working off a list of predefined tasks in Jira or something. And also all the different aspects of the role draw on different kinds of skills. So now I need things like leadership or strategizing or communication. And those softer skills weren't taught in my computer science classes. There's plenty of learning material though out there on them. The critical part is just recognizing that you have to be consciously upskilling in these kind of areas, and you might not have been practicing them in your earlier engineering years. So before doing what I did and chasing the serotonin rush of a promotion, question just honestly, are these the kind of tasks and skills that will interest you? because I really think there's a lot of room for growth in both senior and staff roles where you can continue to push your deep technical skills, potentially even further than you would in this more strategic leadership focused role like principal engineer. So just understand the role at your company and then question if it will fulfill you in the ways that are right for you. So if you do choose this path though, it's going to present a lot of different types of challenges. And that's what brings us to lesson number 2, prioritize yourself. So even as a senior, there can be a lot on your plate. Never-ending backlog of work, a lot of Slack messages. But for me, becoming a principal engineer really took all of those challenges and then multiplied them by 10. So significantly more meetings, hundreds of Slack channels, more commitments, infinite problems. So I really like tying this section to the concept of putting on your own oxygen mask first. You can't help others unless you can breathe yourself. You can't support your teams if you are overloaded yourself. The only way I found to cope is to admit that I couldn't do it all. Give up perfectionism. Honestly, I hated the role for more than a year. I wasn't getting any bad feedback, but as my own harshest critic, I was constantly feeling like I was underperforming. The jump to me as well from senior straight to principal was really jarring. Thinkific has grown in size and has added the staff role now in between the 2 levels, which really allows for a more gradual transition into some of the new responsibilities, but on a single team. But I jumped straight from senior to principal, and so supporting multiple teams. And honestly, I really struggled. The feelings of inadequacy crept up, my old friend imposter syndrome came back, and signs of burnout started to nag me. After a period of trying to do everything for everyone, I had to find better ways to cope. In my early days, I thought a lot of my problems came from time management. Meetings, meetings, meetings. Being involved in more areas means you are going to spend more time in discussions. And for me, as a semi-introvert, nothing burns me out quite the way back-to-back meetings do. Calendar control is important. It did take a lot to get to that refined calendar masterpiece I showed you at the beginning, where I balanced focus time against getting enough face time with all of my teams. But for a lot of it really came down to prioritization. If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So in the name of accountability, I've really started writing out my priorities. The most important thing is to identify a top priority and then actually prioritize it. And that means limiting distractions. Good old Slack. Techniques I use to cope with the number of conversations I'm pulled into these days is I try and avoid multitasking. It's a lie. You are not doing both tasks better. You're doing them both well, worse. I make intentional Slack focus blocks, so bump messages to later in the day, even later in the week if necessary. It also means muting channels and trusting if folks need my input, they will tag me. For me, it's also really helped setting up a support network. So I asked another more senior principal engineer to be my mentor. I started getting more formal check-ins with my manager. I started being more honest with my peers. And I found accountability buddies for building healthy habits at work. And finding that kind of support, it means making connections. So with your teams, but also beyond. The more I networked and built good relationships, the more advocates I was able to find across the company. And this has helped me feel both more connected and also move initiatives now with less friction. And the best way to find places to improve and grow yourself is through reflection. So what worked, what didn't, and what do we want to do next time? This is a screenshot from my weekly plan document in Notion for next week. We'll pretend it's RailsConf week. I write out my wins and learnings for the week alongside a prioritized to-do list. Present at RailsConf/women non-binary. We'll pretend it's that. And maybe talk to a counselor. A lot of us in tech have great health benefits, so why not use them? I found a counselor who specialized in burnout, and they gave me a great number of tangible exercises and tools that I am still using today. Since then, my active mantra has become good enough over perfect, and I hold myself accountable to that. So for a while, I was reflecting every week with my manager on times that week I had given up something, accepting that it was good enough. Perfectionism, after all, it's a form of insecurity. And in tech, I do believe perfect does not exist, and aiming for it is a recipe for burnout. All right, so you've got that oxygen mask on. Now you are more equipped to get to step 3, uplifting others. Impact at this level no longer comes from your ability to solve problems, but your ability to grow your teams to solve their own problems. This is a mental switch for the role, but one that I find really fulfilling. My effectiveness as a technical leader really comes from empowering my teams, because I'm not the one delivering anymore, it's my teams. And part of this is accepting that you're a role model. This is actually the name of a chapter from Tanya Riley's book, The Staff Engineer's Path. Again, highly recommend if you reading the book if you're interested in this kind of role. You're a role model now. Sorry. People look up to me now and follow my example, so I do need to act responsibly. I need technical competency enough to be setting solid direction and also keep standards, high enough standards that people who are following my lead aren't following bad practices. But that doesn't mean I can't make mistakes. It just requires a degree of self-awareness. So being open about what I know and what I don't know, and not being afraid to show my human side. If you do make a mistake, or rather when you make a mistake, own it. Lead by example and set a culture of learning and growing. And then there's coaching and mentorship. So at the principal level, my mentor focus is more on the senior and staff engineers, often uplifting their skills beyond technical even, around getting visibility, leading their own projects, or even how to effectively mentor their own mentees. Something I found extremely useful for formal mentorship sessions is to set clear objectives with your mentee. So what do you want to achieve from the sessions? How long will they go for? What format suits their learning style? And then reflect on that objective frequently to make sure your mentee is getting what they need out of your time together. And when coaching especially, really make an effort to be asking more questions than you answer. People learn by doing their own thinking, not by you always giving them the answers. And this is how they can grow to take more of a leadership role themselves, and even long-term take more off your plate, potentially. This was the biggest game changer for me. I had to learn to let things go. Trust your team. By giving engineers opportunities I was considering doing myself, it helps with the stress of my workload, but also lets them grow. Everybody wins. And even if they try something and it doesn't work out, some of the best advice I've heard was you have to let people make mistakes, because sometimes learning a lesson through experience is the best way to learn. But then still be there to support them when necessary. Finally, be an advocate. Even though you're not a manager, you can still be really influential in your career, in your engineer's career to growth. And that's by finding them opportunities and upskilling them yourself, and also helping them get visibility. So my influence can mean my recommendations also carry weight. And some of my proudest moments have been seeing my mentees get promoted after I've provided tangible examples of their good performance to their manager. Principal engineers should act as a force multiplier. This is from our blurb from Principal Engineer at Thinkific, and I really connected with this term, force multiplier. This is why I get the same satisfaction out of this role, I think, despite the fact I'm not coding as much. Because selfishly, I can achieve so much more via the achievements of my team. I can only write, refactor, and fix so much code. But supporting and mentoring and influencing 3 teams of developers to write their best code, well, that's where the force multiplier factor comes in, 100 timesing what we can achieve together. All right, last step. Step 4. Back to our meme, this is the true enlightenment stage. Technical strategy. These words were super intimidating when I first started, as it kind of sounds like you have everything figured out, and I sure did not. But as I got more grounded and grew more confident in my position, technical strategy I found was really just natural extensions and ideas I'd been trying to push for years at companies to reduce risk, support scale, and improve development efficiency. The difference was now I have the power to really influence progress on some of these ideas. At Thinkific, our principal and architect group has started turning our brains into a more formal technical strategy document. It now contains an annual goal and a set of guiding policies. And these both play into defining a long-term technical roadmap. And we share this document widely and use it to advocate for projects or approaches that can incorporate these policies to keep the team feeling aligned in that we're aiming for the same thing altogether. As an example, last quarter, I used it to nudge 2 of my teams to integrate our new federated GraphQL API into their projects, rather than defaulting to use the more well-known legacy API. I see my role not as a dictator for best practices, but more for just being a positive influence and guiding developers towards making good choices. When the pressure from above comes to deliver features, engineers are sometimes just too close to execution to make space for a preferred technical choice. So my position sometimes allows me to see these opportunities with a bit more perspective. And my influence means I have a bit more power to make the case with product for a slightly higher investment in building something better, even if it takes slightly longer. So in this case, the investment for the developers to onboard to the new API would pay off within months by avoiding maintenance on the 2 separate APIs. Now, technical strategy can only be applied while keeping in view the wider company strategy. And this includes the product roadmap. So feature projects are a clear indicator of where the business focuses right now and what parts of the application are seen as opportunities to invest in. Technical insights can be really influential in business decisions. Some projects won't move without technical investment first, and some projects have huge technical risk associated with them. But equally, a lot of technical work also won't move if it doesn't align with company strategy. My role can help bridge this gap earlier, explaining risks to stakeholders, but also finding opportunities that work for both. As an example, last quarter, we had this initiative to bring in a new type of product. It's called digital downloads, and it's where creators sell a single file, like an ebook or a PDF. So alongside that project, I pushed forward a technical initiative I'd been struggling to move before, which was to add additional insecurity access protection to our file uploads. By showing how the security might impact the success of the new product, I was then able to get support to bring the technical work in as part of the larger project. A technique I used in that case was being able to identify and speak to the customer value of work. So for digital downloads, I highlighted how the security work increased the value of the creator's intellectual property and how a lack of it could really hurt their sales. I believe almost all worthwhile technical work can be linked back to an underlying improvement for customers. The trick is widening your engineering focused brain to think more from a user perspective, finding a way to measure the value, and also admitting when something just isn't worthwhile, even if it is the preferred technical route. Also keep in mind that money is an influential factor. As principal, I've become much more aware of how much my company's financial position impacts my technical decisions. One of my first projects as principal, I was re-architecting our notification system. And initially, I proposed this fully managed distributed Kafka architecture for streaming notification events. And this was shut down pretty quickly due to the high costs of such technology. In 2022, Thinkific business investment was just focused on other important areas. So money influences decisions like these, like things when to build versus buy, also hiring and resources. And in many cases, it does mean accepting compromises on technical ideas. But demonstrating the way a project can pay back costs is the easiest way, I think, to move projects. So last quarter, I put together a proposal for this really quick win feature, which was archiving Thinkific courses. I was talking to our customer support team, and I was shocked to hear how much time they were spending working on requests from customers to delete course data. So I wrote a proposal estimating the cost in terms of customer support team salaries, and then compared it against the estimation for the engineering team to actually build the feature. And the math was really simple. The feature could pay itself off in less than a year. Plus, the financial impact compounds year after year because building it is a one-off cost, but the time saved in support tickets will continue indefinitely. As a bonus, this also made customers super happy. So communicating technical visions with these kind of stakeholders and advocating strategically is probably not a skill you have by default, or at least I shouldn't. It's one of those more subtle skills, and I'm still continuing to build up and learn, and it requires entirely new types of communication and thinking patterns. It's hard, but it can also be really rewarding because it's possible by putting on both your technical hat and your product hat that you can find this incredible sweet spot where there's this opportunity to advance both technical strategy and product strategy at the same time. And a key element to that is learning to think beyond execution. So as engineers, we have a tendency to focus on the practical limitations of solutions. I've definitely been guilty of this throughout my career, so shooting down ideas with the many technical reasons it's too hard. Instead, I now try more of a yes and mentality. So rather than shooting something down, try pivoting it or redirecting it or expanding thinking beyond the box. The reality is people don't like their ideas being shot down. So work together, think creatively, and make compromises. Really focus on building relationships and trust to get ideas moving. And it's only by putting the emphasis on collaboration that I found myself invited to the room. And you'll know what I mean by this concept of the room if you've been inside it. When you're involved in conversations before decisions are made, you're frequently asked for opinion on directions or ideas, and you feel yourself influencing strategic choices. You may think you get invited to the room by default when you reach this level, and that is true for some rooms, but it's not always the case. No designer, for example, is going to invite you to the early explore sessions if you're going to shoot down all their creative ideas. From my experience, the invitation comes by earning respect and having open-minded and authentic interactions with all levels of business. When you're given opportunities to collaborate, demonstrate the value you can bring by providing a constructive technical voice early in the process. All right, so we've looked at our 4 steps: understand the role, prioritize yourself, uplift others, and strategize. What's next? Well, I propose coming back to that first one. Go beyond understanding and redefine the role. As I see it now, the job is pretty flexible. There's no need to put yourself into this predefined box. Different companies have different definitions of the job, but the reality is I've seen it as the role can work very differently for different kinds of people. Reflect on what you're doing, gather feedback, learn from mistakes, and then ask what elements energize you, and then redefine it for yourself. What do you want to get from it? What works for your personality and working style? So after 3 years of this journey as a principal, do I like my job? Yeah, turns out I do. It took quite a bit to get over the hump, I'll admit, but I'm pretty happy with the place I'm at now, having redefined the role to work for me. It's meant I can spread influence beyond a single pair of coding hands. I get to collaborate with folks from all over the business, and I feel closer to customers, driving value for them through technical strategy. Overall, I feel like I have more impact and more respect. And as a woman in tech, I've wasted a lot of energy trying to convince people I'm good at my job. And there's one thing to be said about titles. They do give you a degree of respect without having to prove it all the time, which is now 1 ounce of energy I can put into something more meaningful. All right, I covered a lot in this talk. So the core ideas I'd really like you to leave with are these. Staff plus roles require more than technical skills. Applying technical strategy requires leadership, collaboration, and creative thinking. So give yourself space to learn and grow these new skills. Second, your teams are greater than just you. Most of this job now should be going beyond yourself to focus on others, growing both your teams and your wider company. And finally, embrace the mantra, good enough over perfect. Except in tech, we can't do it all. We can't fix it all. Find the areas you can make the most impact and put your energy into the things that really matter. All right, we're at the end. So if you've been considering a staff plus role, I hope this has given you a better insight into what the role might look like compared to senior. And if you're already in a staff plus role, I hope you were able to take something from the techniques I used to perform this role effectively. I'd love to hear about your experience or learnings in similar roles, so do come chat. That's my name, place to find me online, and some of the excellent books I mentioned in my talk that you should definitely go read if you haven't. Thank you for listening.